The question that I want to address this afternoon is, in what ways can the Reggio Emilia approach to education of young children provide effective means for connecting children to nature? And that needs to be qualified a little bit, because in talking about connecting children to nature, one has to specify the purpose for doing that. And in this case, the purpose is that children grow up loving nature. And that has two facets to it. One is that they care about nature, they want to nurture it and protect it as they grow up. And secondly, is that they want to be in nature, they want to enjoy nature, they feel close to nature, they feel comfortable with nature. And this opens up rich avenues in their lives. The simple theory that I want to suggest as a background for what I want to say is that repeated experiences of pleasure and meaning in children's contact with nature are going to result in their having a love for nature. It's just that simple in a way. And the question is, how do we provide that, and specifically, how does Reggio Emilia fit into that? This kind of experience of pleasure has this effect, especially when there's repeated visits to the same natural site time after time, and when children are accompanied by adults who love nature and who have some knowledge of the ecology of the setting that they're bringing the children into, so that they can use teachable moments to help the child reflect more deeply about what they're encountering. There are three ways that I see that the Reggio approach to education can be really effective in connecting children to nature, and specifically to promote this goal of children growing up loving nature, having a loving relationship with nature. The first is children pursuing their interests, curiosities, and ideas. This is at the center of the Reggio philosophy. Teachers are continually listening to and observing children's expressions of their interests, of their passions, of their feelings, of their curiosities, and of their ideas, documenting those carefully, reflecting on those documentations, and then from all of that, providing learning opportunities for children that respond to their perceptions of what the children are really motivated by. When this occurs in a natural setting, which we know invokes a lot of curiosity and interest on children's parts, it's particularly effective. And it has a deeply pleasurable effect on the children, being able to just follow their own curiosities and interests in a totally helpful way from adults into the natural setting. The second big way that the Reggio approach can be applied to introducing children to natural settings is what I call depth and breadth. We'll deal with depth first. Teachers in the Reggio Emilia and its offshoots in this country are constantly challenging children to look carefully, to look closely at what they encounter, and to look repeatedly, not just once, not just twice, but to keep returning to it, to find out more about it. Children are encouraged to draw while they're observing something, which has the wonderful effect of focusing them much more succinctly on what they're observing and for a longer period of time. Then children are encouraged to revisit their drawings and the dictations that they give to teachers about those drawings with the teacher, to reflect on what they've learned so far and to pose new questions, which takes them back into further inquiry towards the subject or the object of their study. In other words, there's continual cycles of learning that start with engagement, and then reflection, and then engagement, and then reflection again, and then engagement again. These cycles forming a spiral of deepening understanding of the subject that they're addressing, in this case, being a tree, a grasshopper, a plant, something in the natural setting. This phenomenon of going deeply and having the teacher's assistance in doing so is a inherently pleasurable thing for children, especially when it's associated with following their own interests and when they're doing it in collaboration with the teacher and with other children. Now to turn towards breadth, in children's learning. And to this, I want to say that I'm indebted to a marvelous chapter in Louise Cadwell's book called Bringing Reggio Home. It's a very marvelous book that was written in 1997 after her year-long apprenticeship in Reggio Emilia. In this book, she has a wonderful chapter on children in nature. And in this chapter, she also cites Via Vecchia, who was a very famous atelierista at the school where she visited in Reggio Emilia. These are the propositions that apply, I think, to breadth. The more a child explores in depth the life of a living creature, the broader it's going to get in breadth, moving out to looking at the relationships of that creature to its environment. And one of the major forms of that is looking at how that creature meets its needs for food, for shelter, for water, for procreation, and even for play. And that inquiry is even deepened further when the children begin to realize that plants and trees and animals have many of the same needs that we humans have for food, for water, for safety, for procreation, for play. All of these things that animals pursue, we pursue as well. So once a child makes that connection, the animal becomes even more alive to that child, or even the plant. So the deeper and broader the exploration is, the more alive that creature or that plant becomes to the child, particularly as they see how that plant is connected to the rest of its environment. And that experience of relationship with living things is inherently pleasurable, because when the child really appreciates the vitality of another living thing, even if it be a little plant that they're nurturing at home, that is a tremendous reflection to their own vitality, to their own living being. And that is the way that they form relationships with creatures and plants and trees and nature. In other words, it's a relationship that's formed. It's not just collecting data and observations about things in nature and putting them together in some sort of objective frame. It's about a relationship, and that relationship ultimately gets transmuted into a loving relationship with nature as such. Now, I want to add that children's renderings and conclusions from their studies, whether it be of nature or anything else, frequently are highly imaginative, and not very real from the perspective of some adults. In fact, children are very wont to project human attributes human attributes onto animals or even plants and trees. Human thinking, human actions, human feelings attributed to the plants or other living things that they're studying. The important part of about this is that this is quite acceptable within a Reggio frame. The object of the Reggio teacher is not that children do rigorous science, but that children reflect broadly and deeply on what they're engaging and feel a relationship to it and represent that relationship that they feel through their various forms of artwork, whether it be drawing or clay or wire or paints or whatever. It's the child is expressing that relationship with the natural world or with whatever else they're studying through their representations. And finally, the third way that I think that the Reggio approach provides a fine connection for bringing children into nature is through something that we don't think about much, and that is children developing personal relationships with trees or plants or animals. There's a wonderful account in Cadwell's book about a 5-year-old class that had been studying plants and trees for a year, and at the end of that time, the teachers suggested as a final activity that the groups of children might want to adopt trees. And 4 girls decided that they wanted to adopt a little apple tree that was in the orchard just outside the school. And they said they wanted to adopt this tree because, quote, it needs us. So they built clay nests to put in the trees so that the nests would attract birds. They created clay birds and they hung them from the branches of the trees to keep the tree company in their view. And they wanted to know what else they could do to show the tree that they, quote, really loved it. So they threw a party for the tree and they invited all the other classrooms and they made gifts for the tree. They had become aware of the masculine and feminine aspects of the tree because they were wondering whether trees are boys or girls, and they figured they needed a gynecologist, unquote. But the teachers felt, well, maybe they could do better with a botanist. So they had a botanist come in to talk to them, and they were awestruck to find that trees are both masculine and feminine. And this is connected to the pollination process and so on. And so they figured they needed to make gifts for both the masculine and feminine sides of the trees. So for the masculine sides, they made insects and lizards. This is sort of like snails and puppy dog tails from that rhyme we used to learn. And for the feminine side of the tree, they made bracelets and earrings. And they hung all these on the tree at the party. So the point I wanted to make here, resonating with things I've said about these other 2 aspects of the Reggio process, all of this is very pleasurable to children. And this loving relationship that they experience with this tree gave them a kind of pleasure in relationship that they could carry forward into relationships with other living things in nature as they grow up. So, in conclusion, I'd like to say that the Reggio approach has wonderful prospects for bringing children deeply into nature and promoting this love for nature that I've mentioned. But it's not the only way. There's another avenue, at least one other avenue, that is highly effective in different ways, and that is free play in nature. Children just being kind of turned loose in a forest or a meadow or whatever to play. And they might do anything there. They might do running, climbing, chasing butterflies, playing with mud, building and creating sticks with sticks and logs and loose branches, acting out legends of the forest spirits that their teachers had told them about, being animals, being rabbits and coyotes and whatever they want to be. All these things are wonderfully fun for children and create a synapse with a natural environment that they carry forward. So the final point here is that this is not an either-or choice. On one hand, we have this free play approach to nature in which children are getting gross motor development, they're developing general independence, they're developing healthy bodies and physical courage and rich imaginations. And on the other hand, from the Reggio involvement, they're developing inquiry skills, capacities for sustained, focused learning, a sense of agency as an independent and self-motivated learner, and the foundations of ecosystem thinking, because they're not just learning about creatures in isolation in nature, they're learning about relationships between that living thing and its environment, which is the basis of all ecological thinking. So, thinking about these two different approaches, the Reggio and the free play approach, which have very different kinds of outcomes, we have a pretty wonderful combination when we put them together, and that's what I'm proposing. Thank you.